Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley, and I am the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. Each of us is unique. There never has been anyone exactly like us, and there never will be again. One of the greatest risks we face in life is living day to day without any reflection on who we are, what we've done, where we've been, and what really matters to us. Enter Guided Autobiography, a brilliant system of capturing who you are. Guided Autobiography was developed by USC Professor James Birren and is described as a system that captures our lives through writing, sharing, and preserving life stories and experiences. Today's guest, Dr. Bonnie Bernell, is a psychologist, author, professor, and she is 2019's recipient of the Distinguished Contribution to Psychology Award from the California Psychological Association. Bonnie is also a seasoned guided autobiography facilitator. Through this approach, she has midwived stories and unexpected and unclaimed parts of people's lives that might have gone undiscovered without this powerful tool. Bonnie's forthcoming book, co-written with Dr. Cheryl Svensson, is called Treasures That Matter, and it uses the guided autobiography protocol and is addressed to the psychologically curious person around aging. On a personal note, and as you will learn in this interview, Bonnie has been a dear friend and one of my most important mentors. You will be learning from someone I consider a true master. So listen in as Bonnie and I have a lively and user-friendly conversation about guided autobiography, and I expect it will enrich your lives. Dr. Bonnie Bernell, who I will be calling Bonnie, welcome to Super Psyched.
Hi, Adam. Or shall I call you Dr. Dorsey?
I am definitely Adam to you. So before we get started into guided autobiography, let's talk a little bit about you. In addition to being one of my all-time favorite humans, you're a psychologist, a professor, an author, and an artist. And I think you know that I'm a big fan. Can you briefly talk about who you are and what you do?
You know, I do what many psychologists do. I sit with people and talk to people and have a chance to make their lives better some of the time by offering ideas and support, and lucky us.
So Bonnie, it was so much fun watching you get your acceptance speech at the California Psychological Association Convention for Psychologist of the Year in 2019. And one of the things that you highlighted was that you don't just keep psychology in the office, that you are committed to actually letting the world know about psychology from a psychologist's mouth. Could you speak about that?
Yeah. Psychologists learn all sorts of things, and only a very small portion of people will go for therapy, even if it's free. The data, as I understand it, is only 10% of people will go for therapy, again, even if they don't have to pay for it. But psychologists know things that help people live better lives. So I have a very strong belief that psychologists need to get out of their offices and teach people in a whole variety of ways things that we learn and know and believe to be helpful. So I'm so thrilled, Adam, that you are doing these podcasts.
Aww.
It's like the total personification of something that I hold dear, that you talk to people about what they know psychologically and otherwise that can be helpful to people to live a fuller, better, more choiceful life. And so you bring amazing people into people's homes, people who are psychologically savvy, psychologically aware, and they may or may not know that they're bringing psychological concepts, but they are. And if they don't know, you bring it back because, of course, you're a smart, attuned psychologist who can bring that out from people's conversations. So you're doing what I believe in so strongly, and 3 cheers to you. I mean, I'm thrilled to be here anyway, but I'm so thrilled that you are doing this to really expand what psychology, we've all worked so hard to learn what psychology can offer to the greater population than would ever come and see one of us or any of our fabulous colleagues.
I'm remembering your acceptance speech. You mentioned a portion of what you just said just now of going out and talking to people about what it is you do. What are some of the things that you share with the public when you do share something about our field?
I was just talking to somebody earlier this week. It came up in a random conversation, something she did as a Girl Scout that had just been hanging on her, how skilled the person was at actually doing the item to get her badge. And she had seen this young girl cook a meal. So when it came time to sign off on that on the Girl Scout badge, she did. But the girl hadn't actually done it for the badge itself. And this adult has been carrying around those bad feelings for the last 10 years and just feeling guilty that she didn't really see at the moment the girl doing what the badge required.
Yeah.
I talked to her about Fred Luskin's great book, Forgive for Good, which you don't know about, and that alternate definition of forgiveness, not acceptance you did, but that when you think about what you did, you can be peaceful, and directed her to Fred's great material. But it was like a gift of the decade for her because she had been feeling so bad about it. And it was just in random conversation. She wasn't in a therapy office. I believe it's true from the American Psychological Association, the data that only 10% of people will go for therapy, even if it's free. So that means there are a lot of people who could benefit. They'd never go to therapy for various reasons, but there's things that we know that can be helpful.
Wonderful. And one of the things that I appreciate so much about you is I believe that I can call us both two peas in a pod with regard to the fact that we are both psych geeks. I mean, there's nothing more exciting about doing psychology, reading about psychology. I know you're constantly hitting the refresh button and learning more and more. And you're almost like a vending machine with lots and lots of options that you could just offer at the ask. And so I find myself...
Even if not asked.
Even if not asked, here it is. So,
that person did not ask me for help. She was just telling me a story.
Totally. And just given the broad spectrum of your exposure to various aspects of what psychology can bring and offer, it makes Guided Autobiography all the more incredible to me because you've doubled down on this idea. First off, let's hear what is Guided Autobiography.
So in its simplest terms, it's life story writing stories about your life, stories, not like the sequential telling of in January of whatever year I did this, because chronological telling of one story is torturous to write and tedious to read.
Right. But, Captain's log from Star Trek. Not that.
Right. So life story writing, it was created more than 50 years ago by a man named James Birren, PhD, who started the first gerontology program at USC. He stumbled on the concept of guided autobiography. He was trying to get his graduate students more involved with each other, to learn from each other. And he sent them away to write 2 pages about a branching point in their life and come back prepared to read it in class. And they did. And it started this metamorphosis of connections and community and people starting to talk about their lives in an open way. And he knew he was onto something. There are books written about the protocol, which is basically still quite similar, with people are presented with a theme and prompts about the theme. You go and you write about 1,000 words, 2 or 3 pages. You read it in a group where you only get supportive feedback. This is not critiques and challenges because many of us have plenty of critics in the world, plus the inner critic who is always watching, listening, commenting on what we're doing or not doing.
And it sounds like it's prompts and it's done preferably in a group setting. Can you give some examples of prompts, and can you explain why the group setting is so powerful?
The group is the power tool in all of this because, unlike in individual work, you hear lots of perspectives. So, for example, one of the themes, which is what you were asking me about, that I frequently start my groups with is treasures that matter. So think about a treasure that matters. It can be an experience,
Got it.
a person, or a thing. And almost everybody has a treasure that matters. And it's very important. One of those, all of those. Can I tell you a story? One of my favorite stories.
I would love to hear it.
So in my very first group, and I do have permission from the people involved to tell it, it really just completely hooked me on this whole idea of guided autobiography. So I'm just going to call them Dan and Linda. So I asked each person in the group to write about a treasure that mattered, and I gave them prompts about how they might write. And to bring the treasure if it was a thing. And in this instance, Dan brought this pair of shoes that looked like they should be in the trash. Falling apart, really sad, old, holy shoes. And his wife, who was also in the group, was just like so distressed that this was his treasure. This is something he wanted to like bring to the group. So Dan came from a very poor family. And these shoes were the first pair of new shoes he ever received when he graduated from high school. And so happens that he went to West Point. And when he graduated from West Point, he got special permission, not on graduation day, but the day before when they wear their dress whites, to wear these shoes as part of the event, part of the ceremony, because they were so meaningful to him. And then when he got married to Linda, he wanted to wear these shoes to the wedding.
Totally.
Linda did not think that was so cool. And that started years-long battle between them about getting rid of these shoes. But Dan prevailed, and he wore them to the wedding. And he prevailed when he wore them each time his children were born. And he prevailed to wear them at each of his sons' weddings. But along the way, in parallel, Dan and Linda were in therapy about why wouldn't he listen to how important it was to Linda to get rid of these shoes or not wear them on these occasions. And he never told her the story of what they meant to her. He's a military guy. He doesn't talk so much about feelings.
And he never told her the story of what they meant to him?
That's right.
Yeah, got it.
That's right. And he just said, these are my shoes. I want to wear them. Many therapists, I think they saw 3 or 4, it always started out with, these shoes are a barrier between us. And in the group, he just was reading about when he got the shoes and how much they meant to him. And as he's reading, everybody in the group is crying. His wife is in disbelief that he hadn't told her. And as she watched everybody cry, she began to cry too, because clearly these were so important to him in a very basic and profound way. He said, after he read this story, he just couldn't say it out loud. It was too hard for him. It's not the way he thinks. He doesn't talk in feelings. And he was afraid that if he told her, it wouldn't mean enough to her and they'd still be fighting about it and he couldn't face it. That idea actually came from one of the group members.
I can't help but believe that all 4 of the therapists must have asked, what do these shoes mean to you? And I imagine that there was something about the guided autobiography process that allowed him to finally, almost like, a tight jar that you're trying to unscrew, that something allowed him to just release and share that. And I'm wondering, what is your hypothesis? Why do you imagine that Dan was able to share in a group setting rather than in couples therapy?
Because it was his most important treasure. It was the prompt, a treasure that matters. It was his most important treasure, he said, other than his wife and his children. It was the only object that really mattered to him.
It's what he would have rescued from a fire. And then just by that simple and profound prompt, he was able to go there.
For him, it was. It has been for other people. It just was the right moment because it was the right words.
And to the second part of the question, do you imagine that there was something about just the power, the synergy of the group that allowed him to speak up? What do you imagine, just hypothetically, what do you imagine that was?
Well, he joined the group because being in a group was something they were doing together as a couple. And he didn't really have anything else to offer because he's not like a highly verbal guy.
Totally.
And so like he does what's expected.
Yep.
And this is his only treasure. That's what's been so valuable about Guided Autobiography because, the questions are not questions nobody has ever heard of before, but when they're related to a theme that has meaning, it gets you into a place to just see what organically comes. One of the things I wrote about at one point was my mother's wedding ring. So, of course, that's frequently a special object. So I could say my mother's wedding was a special object. But what I wrote about was the story she had told me when she and my father had gotten married, which is not a story that I actually have probably ever told you. And I hadn't told my husband. I hadn't actually really thought about it until I was writing about this object. I knew it. But when I wrote 1,000 words about it, it really transported me to a place I never would have put it together in that way. It's a simple request, but it takes you on its own journey.
Bonnie, I think between you, me, Dan, Linda, everyone listening to this podcast, we are all walking around as virtual treasure chests that go largely untapped. And I think that a big part of it is that we needed those treasures to be evoked from a safe place. And so much of us are focused on being interesting that we forget how to be interested and ask good questions. I don't know that the culture really supports the idea that guided autobiography actually imparts, which is how do you ask good questions that allow us to pry open this treasure chest and reveal to ourselves things that have been hidden for perhaps decades, even to our most intimate people. And I have to also hypothesize, just as you're talking, that there must have been something about the group. I'm imagining, I remember at punk rock shows when I was a kid, and even these days, people would do stage dives. They'd jump on the stage and be somehow carried by the audience through. And I was imagining that Dan must have felt supported in a way by the group that just couldn't have felt in any other dynamic. And that's something about the magic of the powerfulness of the question, the prompt, paired with perhaps his perceived support, allowed him to really tap in and share.
Absolutely right. Groups have their own power. These particular kinds of groups, whether we call them personal growth groups or we call them psychoeducational groups, those are terms that both seem to apply. The group as a whole is its own source of energy to hold people because it's set up, particularly these guided autobiography groups, as a place to be safe. You're not going to be criticized. This is not the challenge of what some people think of as group therapy because of TV or they've been in a group. This is not a process group. That is where people are challenged for what they say or don't do. This is a group to support and help people be with their experience in a positive way. And so in that setting, and I mean, that's emphasized from day one, you will be supported here. This is not a place to be challenged, critiqued, judged in any way. And so to me, that's some of the gorgeous quality of these particular kinds of groups. Other groups are extremely valuable in their own way. They're just different.
It seems like the group itself is informed at the outset that you are here to champion everybody. You're not here to challenge anybody. And almost like in improv, the concept of the yes and, you're yesing.
The only thing in addition, that's exactly right, is And what comes up for me might be but not as anything that you're doing wrong.
Right.
I remember when, or, I have this thing that has created difficulty in my relationship, as you just said, real things and parts of yourself that you bring. I mean, that just spontaneously did that. Nothing like, oh my God, you wore those to your wedding. That's a specific thing that would be modeled as not okay, because we get it. There are places in life where we are challenged. This is to be able to tell your life story in your way and connect with the people in the group. These groups have such power. They absolutely increase community. And many people are more socially isolated these days, not just during the pandemic, but because you can do so much in your home and you can do so much on the computer. But these groups really create community. There's some research at Stanford that was done and many other places that this work stimulates your brain. It enhances well-being because you get to review what's going on in your life. And it also leaves a legacy, because here now are your stories written that you get to give to whomever, or not, of course, you don't have to, but to people you love who love you. And so in and of itself, you write 2 or 3 pages on 10 themes, and now you've had all this positive outcome. I mean, it's sort of magical to me. That's why I've spent so much time at it, and I'm writing a book about it.
Yeah, and that's what's caused you to double down on, given how the limits of time and how much you want to do. I know that you're an exuberant soul with many passions. I mean, one of the things I didn't mention was that you have so many creative pursuits. There's so much of life that you enjoy touching. And the idea that this has become so salient to you really makes it all the more meaningful to me. I'm wondering, what else has Guided Autobiography done for you personally?
The existence of Guided Autobiography came to me in an art class, which was sort of serendipitous. There's a woman in the class, a class I've been going to for 12 years, I think. And she's a great artist, quite a quiet person. And one day she came in all lit up, like on fire. And I thought she's about 80. And I thought she must have a lover, because she was so.
Nothing else could have possibly explained that level of excitement.
Exactly. I'm not sure that's right for the podcast, but
it's absolutely right for the podcast.
Okay. So I went to talk to her. I knew her well. And she told me she was in this study at Stanford on decreasing the impact, the likelihood of Alzheimer's disease.
Wow.
And they had 3 protocols, and one of them was this Guided Autobiography. And as I said earlier, I thought it was something the researcher made up as a protocol just to have people try something different. But in fact, it had been around. It was so exciting to her that I went and looked it up, and I found its history, and I found this professional training. So I thought, well, I'm going to just go see what that is. And I signed up for it. And so for 10 weeks, with other people who wanted to learn how to be facilitators, I wrote my stories and read my stories to my group. And look, you know me. I mean, I've done a zillion kinds of therapy. I've been in individual therapy and group therapy, both for professional learning and because of my own needs. And
that all 7 billion of us have different versions of.
All of which had been helpful and all of which had been meaningful. But what I found, and partly it was that I'd done all the rest of it, and partly it is where I was in my life when I took the training, I found a kind of completion around some of the things that had still been stirring in my brain, in my heart. Not for everything, of course. It wasn't like the panacea, like there's nothing that answers everything. But a kind of peacefulness and a kind of completion about some of the things that I hadn't gotten in other kinds of therapy, sort of complete pieces of my history that I didn't have to review anymore. It was like I wrote it, I read it, I heard things, And I had the stories if I want to share them. And I haven't looked back. And I thought, phew, lucky me.
There's something about this process that allowed you a sense of completion, almost like clicking the X on an application on the computer. It was like, okay, we're good.
I'm done with that. I'm just done with that. And I mean, I had great therapists along the way, and, I really had worked at it. Psychologists need to do that so they don't bring their own noise into the room with other people. And, we're all works in progress, but some things, hurts, wounds, as well as stories that, like in the narrative that you go over and over, some of them, I haven't looked back. They were just done. There was something about sort of the cleanness and the group and the support. Done.
So, Bonnie, I know you and I are both huge proponents of the consumption and the providing of psychotherapy. You and I both really have benefited from receiving psychotherapy. We both love providing it. And there's this other modality that you're just describing now, guided autobiography. How do you see it as an adjunct possibly to therapy? Like, what does therapy do for a consumer to listen? And what might guided autobiography do as perhaps a supplement to therapy?
So certainly that's how I've used it over all these years now. So I think about 10 years. So there are two ways. So there's the original work by James Birren with his 10 themes and his prompts. Then there's another book that was written a few years ago, a great book by Cheryl Svensson, who was James Birren's protege. Her book is called Writing Your Legacy, the step-by-step guide to crafting your life story. So that is the version of how you could do this outside of therapy. The way I see it in therapy, in my book, which I hope will be out later this year, my new book, Treasures That Matter is the current title. I think
such a great title.
Thank you. With Cheryl, because I've written the clinical part, and Cheryl's a gerontologist, so she's writing about the research and the part of it that relates to the aging person. So fortunately, I'm fortunate to have her wisdom and help and her long-term involvement with James Birren. But my book is for two groups. It's for clinicians to use with their clients, which I'll talk about in a moment. And it's for the psychologically savvy person. Now, this next book is using the guided autobiography protocol, which is writing, reading in a group, and getting support. That's the basic outline of it. It's using that protocol for older adults, 60 plus. But anybody can pick it up. There are 10 new themes that aren't the themes that are from James Birren. And the questions are both simple and deeply probing. Simple from a clinical perspective. So how could it be used? You could pick up the book and write for yourself and read it to somebody or some people you care about, asking them to be supportive. You could read it to your partner. You could read it to a small group of people who you trust, who you want to have know you, and they could write to. For the psychologically curious, 60 plus person. But it's primarily addressed to clinicians to offer in groups or to use individual themes with individual clients. So, I mean, the most obvious example is a time that I've used it for somebody who had a lot of difficulty with a sibling. And there were things that there's some painful stories. And so I gave her a theme around family, which had some questions to write about. One of the prompts, is there someone in your family who you have unfinished business with? And would you say if you were going to talk to them about it? Doesn't say you're going to, but if you were. Right. And so for each theme, there are about 20 questions that progressively get more probing. You, as the participant, get to read them and pick, see what speaks to you. And in my groups, what I say is read through all the questions, see what's easy to write about. You could write about that. or C, what makes you kind of queasy. And you could write about that. There's probably more
easy or queasy.
Easy or queasy. And if you get to enter it at any place. So for your own growth, you could do it on your own and you could write, or you could write and read, which is much more powerful, as we've already talked about a group. The most powerful, though, is writing in a group where there are these agreements to both privacy and confidentiality and support, so that you know that what you're going to get is really going to be helpful, positive, encouraging, not challenging, critical, or negative.
You're mentioning the 60 plus population. And as a clinician myself, I can imagine that a younger person would greatly benefit. Is this only for the 60 plus, or from what age can a person start doing this?
You can start at any age.
Good. Okay.
You can start at any age. And in my groups, I've had people from 18 to 89, sometimes in the same group.
So I've got an idea here.
Yeah.
Dinner time conversation is often, how was your day? I'm going, and you really end up having kind of a basic automated conversation. I'm wondering if there's a way that guided autobiography could almost apply to dinner time conversations for families, so that we could really get into like one question. Because one of the things I'm inferring from everything you're sharing is there must be an audience, that this is not done solo, that there should be an audience. And I think the dinner table could be a great place for this. What are your thoughts?
I totally, completely love the idea, especially if we're at dinner together. So let's do that.
I can't wait, by the way, until we're both vaccinated and can do that again.
You know, the condition that has to be present is an affirmative agreement to safety.
Oh, God, yes. Absolutely.
And that means either there's an enforcer or there are people who really trust each other, because otherwise people just are not going to participate in a very open way. And why should they? I mean,
it would kill the entire process if something unsafe was unleashed.
Yeah. And even, I've said that you as the leader, because this is primarily, it's established as a group process, although it can be used in other ways. It starts with that. But even in my groups that are ongoing, every time we get together, I remind them of the agreement that this is supportive and this is encouraging and positive. And I always say something like, and you can't get up in the middle of when somebody's reading, and you can't gasp when somebody says, I did X. There was this wonderful moment in a group, and it's actually really what you're talking about, where the person had written and brought it to the group, but then took it to her family. For many years, she's been worried that she will get Alzheimer's, a disease many of us are worried about.
Oh, my goodness.
What she wrote about was what she would want from her family if she does. And it brings tears to my eyes as I hear her talking about being in a sunlit room. She's an artist, and she'd want her beautiful artist pencils around her and her color, and she'd like it to be quiet. And so this was her writing for the group of what she would want if she had that diagnosis. And in the group, there was tremendous support and acknowledgement of her bravery for even facing this and facing her fear and writing about it. And someone in the group said, do you want to tell your family? Which she hadn't thought about. She was writing for the group. And she did. She took it home. She read it to her husband. She read it to her adult children. And there's so much meaning in it for everyone. They know what she wants if that happens.
So it's almost like a living will, a being of sound mind and body. This is what I would want.
That's right. But who writes that? We all think we will. Many of us think it'd be a good idea. But it was, again, the prompt, like, Dan's prompt that just had him think about his shoes, or the prompt, it wasn't the same way, but the person telling me her story about the pain she had as a Girl Scout. What this does is give people access to their stored memories in a safe way that has a progression. So if you write your 10 stories in the group, you have this gorgeous legacy, but it's done all these other things. Again, it stimulates your brain, it promotes community, enhances well-being. And for a clinician, the material and treasures will be turnkey. Everything is there, all the worksheets, all the prompts, the themes, the prompts, how to set up a group, how to hear the agreements for confidentiality. Because in many communities, there just are people who are underserved, and that's what I hoped it would be.
I find myself thinking about another insurance policy. In addition to creating our own almost advanced medical directive in this form, there is an epidemic of elderly people dying with their stories and their children and grandchildren not knowing. And I find myself thinking about these great probes that are going to be written about in Living in Treasures That Matter as almost a guidebook for grandchildren or children to have more meaningful conversations, not just talking about technology and politics with their elders, but talking about things that those elders might take with them to the grave.
Just take the theme that I talked to you about with Dan or with my mother's wedding ring.
Sure.
If you just take that one theme and at dinner, your family dinner, or the dinner with some older person, if you ask somebody, now there are more detailed prompts, of course, but do you have a treasure, a thing, an experience, a person who comes to mind who was meaningful in your life? I mean, that itself, that one
question. Yeah. You know, one of the things that connects us, in addition to a whole bunch of other things, is I used to do video biographies of the elderly.
Yeah.
What would happen is I would be hired by the adult child of an elderly person. I'd go to the elderly person's place and I had a whole bunch of questions and I'd ask. And these interviews could last anywhere from 1 to 5 hours. And invariably, the elder person would look at me afterwards and say, "That was awesome. Thank you." It was some theme and variation. Obviously, that wasn't in their vernacular. "That was great. Thank you so much." And then I learned about reminiscence therapy, which is an evidence-based psychotherapy for the elderly, which is exactly as it sounds, where the elderly have the opportunity to reminisce and talk about things that transpired. And I remember using it. I worked for about 3 months in a geriatric hospital. And I found that there was so much value in asking good questions to these people who are really actually being ignored.
So that's where I got totally jazzed after the training. So I've done all these workshops now, but sort of my heartfelt desire, and it's really why I wrote Treasures and asked Cheryl to join me, because it gives it breadth and depth. Everybody at 65 is covered by Medicare. And we know that Medicare for some providers is a fine system to engage with. And for others, unfortunately, most, it's not something they agree to do. And so if you as a clinician see people in a group, which does mean if you're going to provide therapy, you have to be a trained and usually licensed therapist. And if the people you would see have a diagnosis, and many people 65 and over do, even if it's just adjusting to what happens with social isolation or health challenges or loss and grief, it is a way to offer services to a chronically underserved population in a way that is deeply, profoundly meaningful, actually fun some of the time and lively, and produces this legacy. But it's healing, it's therapy, it's growth, it resolves things. And so I think many therapists are either reluctant to deal with older people because they don't know what to say or they don't know what to do. So again, this book will be a turnkey manual with the questions to use any way you want. I love your ideas. Use them at dinner. Use them with the family elder person to get to know them. Use Treasures That Matter because you're heard it on the podcast. Now, there'll be detailed questions. There are 4 pages of questions related to that. So I don't know, there are 50, but you don't need all that. Ask the question. And then, if you want to do clinical work with it, it'll be there. But it's really a way to heal. It's a way to connect. It's a way to really have something more interesting go on between you with people who often have had amazing stories to tell.
Just wonderful. Well, Bonnie, I've got 2 more questions. And the first of the last 2 is, might there be anyone for whom guided autobiography would be contraindicated in any way?
Well, sure. Nothing's for everybody. And if somebody is too wounded, looking back is too traumatic, they're still in an active process of pain. You as a clinician would have to decide whether asking people to go back and review is a good thing or not. You have to work within your scope of competence to help people.
Sure.
But sure, nothing's for everybody. And some people will not like it, won't gravitate to it, will think it's just one more writing experience, which it's quite distinct. And the evidence about that has really parsed that to see, is it the same or different than other kinds of writing? So no, it's not for everybody.
It would be somewhat atypical for most people, is what I'm garnering from your question. It would be totally appropriate.
Yeah. If you have a thought disorder, if you're schizophrenic,
exactly.
No, I'm not, that's not my expertise.
Right. But
probably not, but I don't know.
Sure. For most reasonably functioning individuals, this should be a perfectly acceptable modality. And one of the things I'm thinking about is I'm remembering giving the eulogy at my grandfather's funeral. And a lot of people don't know this, but working with the elderly is incredibly fun, which is part of why I did these video biographies. I really, enjoyed the interaction. And I remember I wanted to tell a dirty joke that was one of my grandfather's favorites. And I asked the people in attendance, would it be okay? And all of his friends said, come on, we've seen it all. We've heard it all. There's nothing that can shock us anymore. Please tell your grandpa's favorite joke. And they loved the joke. And there was something very refreshing about working with the elderly. So I know this is not exclusively for the elderly, but a big shout out for people who are willing to work with this population. It's fantastic.
Well, what's interesting? I just read in the New York Times this week that 16% of people now are 65 and over. 16,
that's the largest number ever, I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly. And every day, 10,000 people turn 65.
Wow.
So in the next 10 years, the increase in people 65 and over is just going to take over because we baby boomers are heading through that. And so it's going to expand.
So funny. I always think of you as a fellow Gen Xer. I can't believe you're a baby boomer. Well, earlier on, before the interview, I referred to you as the Energizer Bunny, which I do see you. But I've got to close with this great question. It's fantastical in nature. If the maximum number of people for whom guided autobiography was indicated on the planet engaged in pursuing it, what do you imagine the effect would be on the individuals as well as on society at large?
Social isolation is epidemic. And people are glued to their TVs and to whatever media source they choose and to little bits and little bits of that. So if we get to interact with people who are like us, but we get to interact with people who are different from us, the world is a different place because we all have things to learn from, clearly, people who we already spend time with, but we have to be talking to people who are different than us if we are going to have a better world to be in.
That's right.
And I think there's more comfort that those of us who've been injured or wounded, which is true for many people, life isn't easy for parents or their children. And if we assume everybody tries to do the best they can, which isn't totally true, but if we think that's mostly true, Still, people get wounded and injured. And so healing can occur for ourselves and our community and our world. And then there's the legacy that people who come after us, we know the news will be creating a legacy, what media writes about. But when we tell our story, there's a huge source of learning about who and what matters. And that's certainly of equivalent quality and value to anything written by the media. And I support the media. And this is the personal stories that are there to be learned from. But the hugest thing is less social isolation. I mean, the more we can be with each other, especially people who are different from us, the more the world can be a better place.
As I hear you talking about social isolation, I think about Dr. Vivek Murthy, the former and possibly future Surgeon General of the United States, who talked about loneliness being at such epidemic levels that it's actually a public health problem. So what you're describing right now is really useful for that. You're also talking about the descendants of people who get to tell their stories while they're alive. And I think about this great quote. I want to say it was Maya Angelou who said, unless you know where you're from, you don't know where you're going, something akin to that. And having these guided autobiographies available for people to read or listen to, or perhaps even see on video, could allow the descendants to have a better sense of where they're from, who they're from, what are the values that they wish to carry on. And I think your work is fantastic. Bonnie, you've been such an important voice in my life, and I'm so delighted that my listeners have gotten to hear you as well. Thank you so much for giving your most precious gift, your time.
Thank you for inviting me, Adam. It's my great honor to be here with you and be in this lineup of incredible people who you have found and have had the most stirring conversations with that are possible. I'm just honored to be part of anything you do. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, right back at you, Bonnie. This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.